Welcome to Access to Analytics, the show where we discuss everything data and access to data.
Hey, welcome to Access to Analytics, the show where we talk about everything data and data access management. I'm super excited with today's guest, Taras Slipets, who is staff data engineer at Flix. Why that is exciting is because Flix, there you see them everywhere, right? You see the buses. We even saw a Flix train, which to my big surprise was very interesting to see. They're working in 40 countries. They got more than 4,000 buses. I had to read this, more than 60 million passengers, 5,000 employees. So we're talking about huge amounts of data, passenger data, business critical data, streaming, batch. So lots of data. And then Taras told me there were like 79 teams spread across 11 domains. That's a lot of data you have to work with.
Great introduction. Nice to see you all. Thanks a lot for joining and watching. To continue this kind of high bar of introduction, as you might guess, we have really different challenges. And just to briefly describe my background, where I started, why basically things are like they are. So I joined Flix was a little bit more than 5 years ago. For 3 years, I was, let's say, on the client side of the data platform. So I was a team who were heavily doing different of analytics, machine learning, and so on. So I was very big, let's say, user of that platform, both streaming part and also the analytical warehousing part there. And then 2 years ago, I switched basically to the actual core data platform team, where we do all those things. Yeah, I used to be a Java guy for a long time, almost 8 years. Always was interested in infrastructure. Since I joined Flix 5 years ago, like a lot of work with AWS, so building cloud native systems from scratch, optimizing it. You can imagine how much fun we also have with international regulations, right? Because 2018, 5 years ago, was a time when GDPR kicked in. I think it was also May or something. So yeah, a lot of different, very, very different and very interesting challenges, for this period of time.
We were just talking earlier, you gave me a sense of the amounts of data. I believe it was like somewhere between terabytes and petabytes. What are you using that data for? Like, what are the use cases for data at Flixbus? Or at Flix, I can imagine you can have tons of types of data and use it for various use cases. I'm curious how you're using it at Flix.
Yeah, so to address that, it's nice link to the information that you already described, that we have 11 domains, which are, of course, certain area of expertise. For instance, e-commerce or marketing, right? Or finance and so on. So use cases when it comes to domain-oriented structure, of course, are related to domain of expertise and the area of expertise, which in its turn determines, okay, when it comes, for example, for real-time processing and it's in e-commerce, well, you can easily imagine that it's related to, for example, making orders, so people buying tickets through mobile application, website, and so on. So one of the typical scenarios, right? Or for instance, when it comes to some batch processing and analytics, things like customer lifetime value analysis and forecasting. Yeah, so churn analysis, recommendation system, and so on. So sort of other, let's say, pole of the things. And really the scenarios which are related either to real-time processing or analytical batch processing, it happens in all of the domains, right? But the type of the nature of underlying data is different, and that nature of the data is determined actually by the domain, so the area of expertise.
Did I understand correctly that you're not only using or building an infrastructure for analytical data, so you give the classics, right? CLV, churn analysis, recommendations, but you're also supporting operational data. I heard orders, buying tickets, and so forth. So it's operational and analytical in one platform?
Yeah, so we have I would say, pretty classy in terms of high-level architecture, something more or less representation of Lambda architecture. So we have real-time layer with a lot of data going through. As you said, there's people buying tickets, the buses are on the road, right? So people are checking in, there are bus drivers, all of that information goes through the real-time platform, which is in our case based on Kafka. So those kind of things. Then, okay, the analytical part, right, as well, very different scenarios. And of course, you need to move data usually back and forth as well. So, okay, I had something in the real time. I want to do the further analytics. And of course, like if we talk about machine learning or reporting, Kafka is not the best option, right, to do such kind of loads. It's way better if you have a sort of a warehouse or something like that. So in our case, that is based on a Snowflake. We are very big and very happy users of Snowflake ecosystem, really depending on which data goes through which system. So of course, tons of raw data, but we don't store everything, which means that, let's say, realistic scale of analytical information that is preserved, filtered, aggregated, and so on. So truly speaking, it's still somewhere within terabyte scale. We also have a long-term storage or raw data storage. We figured out in a hard way that it still doesn't make sense to store like everything. There is still information which is important only within a, let's say, fixed time manner context. So like its value in a real time. However, if I, let's say, keep it for 1 year, this is a very little of use. So that part basically give us a possibility to slightly reduce the size of the sort of archived or raw persistent data and so on.
From what I understand, it looks a bit like a funnel, right? You have terabytes, huge amounts of data from just operational data, streaming data, tickets, orders, and so forth. And then a subset of that, which is still pretty large, is then stored also in Snowflake for analytical use cases. You talked about 11 domains. These domains, do they correspond to how the business is organized? I thought I kept marketing, finance. Is it mapped to the business process or to the organization?
These domains are how our tech department, or how we call it Flix tech, is structured. And this is very, very direct relationship with corresponding, let's say, business counterparts. So we have this engineering product teams with the different expertise, so they're like self-contained. They're front-end engineers, they're like machine learning specialists, designers, quality assurance specialists, infrastructure engineers or SREs, depending. So usually the team have a well-rounded, let's say, expertise, to be self-contained to deliver engineering products. And it directly works with the corresponding, let's say, business division of the company. So you can imagine marketing domain, tech domain is directly working on day-to-day basis with actual marketing specialists. And so
Very cool. Very cool. So you got like self-contained, self-sufficient domains per, let's call it line of business, right? Like marketing, where you got all the experts needed to build data products that provides that line of business with the insights that they need, right? That's analytics. Does it also contain like the streaming part, or is that what I'm saying is, do you have like streaming data, operational streaming data per domain, or is it just one domain that needs that streaming data?
We always try to do, for example, how AWS they call it working backwards, but it's not really like working backwards, right? It's working starting from business case and then figuring out what we need to build as engineers which kind of a solution we have to build to fulfill this business case or requirement, and so on, or need. So even this like why 11, like why this kind of, this is basically reflection of our business divisions. So majority of the business divisions, they need some, let's say, engineering work to be done and related. And that's why we have it like this. And okay, once we in that setup, this means that the domain related to this business division was at Flix Tech, right? So it actually has knowledge, expertise, and close cooperation with business people to basically work on the business cases, which, so are first in citizens of that kind. Based on the business case, right, it's basically our task then. I mean, our task as Flix engineer, Flix Tech, basically, Flix engineering department, to figure out what would be the right architecture to solving this. Do we need a web application? I don't know, backend with REST or GraphQL API? Do we need mobile customer-facing application? Do we want, for instance, to use email as communication channel? Which type of, let's say, user notifications we want to use? Payments integration. So really highly depends on the domain business cases. And from them, we're deriving which sort and types of data flows we want to have. Of course, when it comes to things like, okay, our client should be able to book a ticket. This is clearly a real-time activity, right? It's not something that you want to. However, if you want to improve your recommendation saying, hey, you seem to be like a person who's, is interested in traveling to mountains. So here, what we have for you might be interesting, right? To do that, you should be able to do some sort of analytical, like post-processing of the historical information, which of course makes such scenario very good candidate to be something within your analytical batch processing warehouse and so on.
You guys provide the platform. What is the interplay between the domain teams and you as, are you a central platform team? Are you part of the domain? So how should we see that?
Pretty much precise description of what we do and how is that it is contained in this modern description of, let's say, data mesh practices and concepts as such. And there, if you look into description of different roles and recommendations and best practices, there is one concept called data platform team, which serves as basically like a common denominator of platform level tools and like cross-functional requirements and so on, like security, governance, permission management, integrations and so on. So which are not directly related to actual product engineering work, but this is very, very important part or very important components of the overall data platform. So getting to aligned with the concept of working from the business down to implementations, pretty often we observe the pretty common pattern. So like there is one team who started doing something, let's say new, some sort of the processing workflow. And then because it's a success, then there are other teams who just taking over this kind of lessons learned, best practice, and so on. So we see basically replicating of the usage across multiple teams. Or let's say multiple teams try to do the similar things. Again, this is for us a very, very good sign, like ringing a bell, saying, okay, this probably type of activity or these tools that they use seem to be reasonable candidates to be included in the platform. So teams don't need to repeat the same work again and again, and they can concentrate on actually using those kind of tools or using those kind of integrations and benefit from the basically scale of the platform. Pretty much similar concept as, so if you're using cloud providers, usually the real boost of your performance and productivity comes when you use multiple services. So there is a synergetic effect. Very similar situation here. So let's say multiple teams want to use, I don't know, KSQL, for instance, within the platform. It is something relatively new that we observed. So yeah, there was one team who was doing it for a while, but again, as it was solely use case for them, it didn't that much sense for us to interfere. They're a very advanced engineering team. They know what they're doing. Yeah, so it was not that needed.
Does Flix apply this framework where, okay, you got a platform where you got tools that are supported, analyzed. I guess you do some study whether they're secure, private, scalable, and so forth. And then tools, but you don't stop teams from you don't prevent other teams from innovating or discovering other tools. Is that how I should interpret it? Like, do the teams still have freedom to play around with new tools and test them out?
We are fostering autonomy and basically the ownership of stuff. So we have even a motto, kind of internal one. You build it, you run it, you own it. Of course, there are general ground rules regarding security, regarding compliance, especially taking into account that we are basically now in 40 countries. There is one more to come, so we'll be in 41. You can imagine how much fun we have with international regulations. So there are, of course, ground rules which are mandatory, right? So you don't want to have your database from production environment being publicly accessible without password, right? Things like that. So with that, of course, there are basically some like a mandatory security checklist and compliance checklist and so on. We also have, like on top of that, recommendations. So, okay, if you want to do, I don't know, containers, we recommend you to consider, for example, our best practices, which we also constantly collect and structure and aggregate. So what we learned from, let's say, using of Kubernetes for, quite a long time, basically 5.5 years, something like that, approximately. I don't remember exactly when we really started that super, It was very challenging, especially in the beginning, but nowadays a lot of things. So yeah, that's also part of the platform.
Yeah.
Not strictly speaking, my team basically, but there is a team called Cloud Platform. So surprise, surprise, they are owners of this kind of platform level services and so on. But the idea is that with these recommendations, we want to achieve improvement of productivity, right? So people don't need to go through this learning themselves from very beginning. They can build things on top of what we already know, what we've already learned. And of course, the last step when you're doing something yourself for the first time, right? So this type of work, usually, and that's also my personal observation, the best place where such kind of thing should happen is this product engineering team, for two reasons. First thing, they are main experts in that area, right? Because they work directly with the business stakeholders. So there is no one in a company who has better combination of business domain and engineering knowledge than such team. And the second part, of course, is that when it comes to effective experiments, right? So because they have this technical knowledge, what they do and so on, they also have this recommendation that they know the gaps. So which type of services we don't have yet, which type of experiments they can build on top of it, just knowing that they don't need to reinvent bicycle for something which is already in place.
Very luxurious position, right? You see how you have like this bird's eye perspective. You see everybody innovate. You start seeing common denominators, right? The commonalities. You learn, you incorporate it in the platform, and you can make the whole organization more productive by making libraries in a way that's very interesting. Well, you mentioned data mesh. I hear like teams can innovate, they can introduce new technologies because, as you say, right, the engineers there, they are best suited to understand what are the business needs and what are the discrepancies with the current platform. Now, One of the principles of data mesh is that a data product in one domain team can become input for a data product in another team. When a team is innovating, like with a new technology, the data products that are in that technology, can they already serve as input for other product teams, or can it only be when it's part of the infrastructure that you manage, right? So can these new technologies that they're playing around with, can they already be used to build? Can other data teams already or domain teams build on them, or do you want to govern that? Does that have to be part of the infrastructure?
Very good question. Yeah, I would probably split it in two parts. So first part is when we talk about the data exchange itself. And for us, this is a part of like our requirements to ourselves. So the tools that we build should enable, empower, and really they should be simple and convenient for the people who want to share the data sets with each other. You can imagine that when you have so many teams, the data discovery itself is a very big challenge. Because every team, of course, they have some data in the multiple storages usually, and it's not far away from the times when you have just a single relational database like MySQL or Postgres or something. Those times are far away. So usually you have a whole zoo of per team, even per team. So building those kind of data platform tools is a fun work. So we try to look into that from again perspective of data mesh as a concept, saying the data sets, they are effectively unit of maintenance, unit of value, which means that they have a lot of similarities with the software and things like, okay, how we do cross teams access to that. So we have very clear definition. So there is always one owner of specific, like it's for service, it's clear. So the owner is a team who developed and maintained that service. Very similar situation with the data sets and so on. So there is a very clear owner, let's say, of the topic in Kafka. It's always one owner. It's not the case that the multiple teams can produce, for example, records into the same Kafka topic. No, it's always team who owns that. So in that sort, let's say I can say that the Kafka topic is one of the very, let's say, simple example of data sets, right? So it's the stream of the data. Producer of that stream is always specific team. There might be really a lot of consumers from the various domains, and that's actually the case. So again, then fine-grained permission model, when you have a requester of the data, and that the tool should facilitate explicit, and we are pretty good, I would say, is it? So there is like a fully self-service and autonomous and automated way of doing this. So there is zero manual interaction from our team. So there is a team who says, I want to consume this streaming data from the topic. There is, because of the naming convention and the structure of all of the things, the way very, I would say, pretty clear way to determine to which team such requester should ask to approve this request, and the owner team just approves that and allows such kind of a consumption. And that's basically it. And the tools that we've built in our team allow to do that with zero manual interaction from our team. We don't do any manual approvals, anything like that. There are automation checks, automatic permission upgrades, CI/CD pipelines that allow that, the monitoring on top of that, and so on. This is like one example. Of course, Kafka topics, I would say, is a pretty simple case. You have a lot of much complex situations when it comes to analytical works, right? So, and again, in our case, we're very lucky because we use Snowflake heavily for analytical workloads. And Snowflake itself, they do really great job in terms of, okay, moving into this direction. So there we use something called like single account database per team topology. Usually there are two. But again, I won't steal the thunder from Snowflake guys. They talk a lot about this. So guys, if you're interested, check it out. There are enough talks, even directly in the YouTube regarding what Snowflake does there. So we just use one of that topology. So when we have single account and every team has their own database and they are owners of that database. So all tables, views, procedures, user-defined functions, streams, and so on, they have full control over it. And when it comes to sharing, again, we have set of ground rules as well, but that part is also, it's not 100% automation, so it's like work in progress for us because it's much more complex than for the Kafka ecosystem. So I would say work in progress at the moment. Mm-hmm. And there, basically, okay, in Kafka, it's pretty clear your unit of work is topic. In case of Snowflake, you have more options. So there might be tables, there might be views, there might be even schemas, there might be shares. There are two nice concepts specific to Snowflake, basically. So something that is like a public marketplace where you can basically share data sets with the entire world, right? And even monetize that. And there is like a second very interesting, I would say, option where you kind of have private marketplace, something called data exchange, where you want to say, okay, I want still to explicitly manage my data as a data products, data sets, but I want to, to limit the access and visibility to my organization only. Again, a lot of information directly from Snowflake. Doesn't make that much sense to repeat that information. It's like more how we use that concept internally. That's what's interesting. Something we find out, for example, from interaction between those two, that classy data mart approaches works really, really well, which in a nutshell means that you separate internal storage. So I, as the owner of the data, I have some nice and convenient and optimal for me way of storing this information. So a bunch of tables, the format that I use, structure, and so on. However, I want to share these data with other teams, other domains. That is decoupled from the storage. Of course, again, there are multiple ways you can copy over the data. So, for example, for performance reasons, using actual tables or materialized views or something like that. You can just put something lightweight like a view on top of this, right? So that decoupling makes sense, let's say 99% of cases. There is a pretty rare scenario when really the team shares the raw underlying data. Sometimes that actually happens, but usually that's the case when people know exactly what they're doing with that, so it's intentional. Also, again, because we have a lot of fun with international regulations, sometimes there are just legal requirements for, let's say, time that you obligated to store information for. Yeah, so example, German regulation requires commercial company to store information related to taxes for 10 years, right? So there we can easily get to very large amount of data. So that part of things like archiving it properly, ensuring that you can get to the data, ensure that you know what is stored where. This is also part of our work as the data platform team, because you might have multiple types of data to be archived for long-term storage, but the process of archiving itself most likely is similar or even the same, which makes this perfect use case, for us as a platform team. So those kind of things, basically, sometimes it's juggling between streaming, analytical, and long-term storage, but yeah, always fun.
So it seems that on Kafka, with the topics, the data sets are clearly delineated, owners are assigned, you got naming conventions, there's like this nice, fully automated access request workflow. So it seems that on Kafka, everything data governance is well managed. Now you're rolling it out on Snowflake, right? Where you will have like in one account a database per team, and then the data products can be in various shapes and formats. How are you seeing the data governance elements that you've worked out for Kafka, like the owners, or just the discoverability, the access request, the naming conventions? Are you managing that from one central platform, or are you managing it from like a platform for Kafka, one platform for Snowflake? Or how does that data governance framework look like? Is it one central location, or you got a framework and tool per system?
So we're now one of our very big focuses and work streams is the data cataloging, data discovery, and so on. Honestly speaking, of course, due to the very different nature of those systems, we started with a separate tools, of course.
Yeah.
However, for example, things like our internal naming conventions already allow you to connect dots between things. When we talk about this fine-grained, autonomous self-service for permissions, requesting access to the topics in Kafka, some data sets, basically tables, views in Snowflake, or S3 buckets or something when it comes to archiving or long-term, there are still different places for that. Practically, again, because of the different nature. However, the communication between teams and the naming convention and the principles in terms of, okay, who allowed to do what, those kind of things are unified. Example, so we want to foster people to look out for the data sets which are already in place, right? Because in that case, like in data sets, you might have some situation, probably someone already have it, right? That kind of data set. And you're thinking, okay, should I build a new data set myself, or I can look for something and just use something which is there? Well, again, similarities with the software, right? I don't want to rewrite the library to copy files, most likely. So let's say it's a high quality data set about customer insights, right? And I'm building like recommendation system. I don't necessarily have to build customer insights myself if that's already built by some other team. I still might need to assess the relevance of that data set for my case, but that's a separate question. So conventions that we usually have, so we foster data discovery, so we're building actually unified catalog as well, that's work in progress, but due to the fact that we allow people to list things, so everybody is allowed to list what are there. For instance, what type of views, tables, databases, or Kafka topics is there, but by default, you cannot see the actual data in them for clear reasons. So this is the unified user experience. That will happen when you go to Kafka and try to list and see the data in topics, or you go to Archive, which is in our case backed by AWS S3, or you go to Snowflake, you will be able to see schemas, but you won't be able to see the data within actual table until you explicitly request access to that, and you got explicit approval and confirmation from teams who own this. It's a very transparent process for that, very explicit. And this is the common approach. Again, naming convention is also the same. So it's very easy once you get used to it to determine who's the owner of that particular resource, whether it's Kafka topic or bucket on S3 or schema in Snowflake. All of that has very, very similar naming convention, which allows you to explicitly and uniquely identify the owner of that information.
It starts with ownership, right? If you want to do data at scale, you need some scalable data governance, and there it all starts with ownership. So now you're working on this unified catalog. You got like this unified naming convention. For discoverability, you want people to catalog their data products with the metadata, of course, not showing the actual data, and then assign owners who will approve the access requests, right? Now, myself a bit of a privacy nerd. Also saw it in your profile that you worked on privacy. So you probably feel the question coming. You're operational in 40 countries. That's a lot of data regulations. You mentioned the German one, which is very strict. When you look at data access management, you mentioned that data owners can approve access requests. How do you make sure that that is in compliance with all the different data regulations, right? You got data sovereignty, then you got purpose-based access controls, data minimization. Each regulation has its own, each country has its own rules that do not always match. At Flix, so as you federate responsibilities to the data owners, how do you keep control over that really sensitive data and the usage of it to make sure that you comply with all these different regulations, all the different interpretations, and then again across so much data and a data stack consisting of multiple tools?
The whole separate series out of this, right? Because it's like tons of information. So I try to summarize it. Yeah, I mean, we're kind of lucky because Flixbus originates from Germany, where, as you mentioned, is a very, very strict regulation. So in most cases, if you're good in Germany, it's just a matter of adoption to the specific country's regulation. So yeah, basically you apply similar principles and you just change things. Usually they're more democratic, liberated. Yeah. What we do is that, so again, we have a luxury, and because we have pretty clear and precise tracking of which type of information is stored on one data set or another, so we are able to explicitly understand which type of regulation should be applied to this information. To actually filter out type of access or purposes of usage of the data, I would say we have pretty extensive system of consents. Some of them are international, some of them are regional, local. Sometimes they're overlap or overlay, so it's like one regulation on top of another and so on. And yeah, basically right now we're in the middle of moving from self-developed system, because again, it was never optional thing for us. We treat our customers' information very seriously. There are a lot of automation for the proper deletion things from basically all of the distributed data storages that we have. Again, you can imagine how much fun we have building such kind of a system, right? So this is for us something at the very, very core, the security. There is a really great rise and a really, really big acceleration on the tools which do those kind of things. So we are now basically did the evaluation over what is there on the market. Again, it's not a super big secret. So we made a choice in favor of OneTrust. Is that? So basically now we were building the integration between what we have in-house solution, which is several years actually old, right? So of course it's constantly uplifted, but at some point we want to basically integrate those two systems and build this integration in favor of finally using OneTrust at its full capacity.
Yeah.
Also the trend we clearly see across all tools in the data landscape. Snowflake, streaming system providers like Confluent, Aven, and so on. But all of them are building some sort of pluggable, let's say, functionality and or even direct integrations with such compliance and governance tool, which is really great because again, then once we're in that world, it will be much easier for us also to plug in back those kind of things. Yeah, due to historical reasons, we have a lot of things developed in-house. That's also true. So yeah, to be honest, we still have a couple of manual steps when it comes to, let's say, coordination between legal and tech. But I mean, if you think about differences between those two worlds, I still consider it a very, very big success and also kind of a quite nicely maturity of this overall process because we have that coordination. Yeah, there are still a couple of manual steps, but this thing is transparent. and this is something which is not like, just we figure out 1 year later accidentally that someone is using something. No, that's not really the case. So in that sense, I would say we're in a very good shape. However, of course, to reach like 100% automation in this cross-domain, cross-purpose things, and also keeping this fine-grained control. So customer might say, okay, use my email to send me ticket, but please don't use it for marketing newsletters, or please don't use it for, teaching your machine learning models for recommendation system or churn analysis. So we have those kind of differentiations.
Good to hear that at Flix, security is so important. You're working with loads of customer data and business critical data, yet somehow you manage to offer these very personalized services to your customers. And that's really key to success, right? Processing huge amounts of data, offering personalized services while keeping security at heart. That really is the recipe for success. And I mean, if Frank Sinatra would have to write a song today, it wouldn't be if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. No, in today's world where you have to work with customer data, you have to do that scale while remaining compliant. It seems that now it would be if you can make it in Germany, you can make it anywhere. Taras, thank you so much to talk about data at Flix and how secure it is, keeping privacy preferences, data retention, security, access management, compliant with all that stuff, doing that at a scale that a modern company needs.
My pleasure to have this conversation. Thanks a lot for invitation. Yeah.
All right.
Thanks a lot for listening.
Indeed. Thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.